So our first topic is basically, it's called test case design. So this is really focusing more on optimizing your test automation. So what we're going to do is go through and see from a test case design perspective, what we mean by that and where's the value in that is basically what we see today is with all automation tools, when we approach our customers, we see huge redundancies in test portfolios out there. So up to 65, 67%. And we see a very low risk coverage. So what happens is over time, once you're enabled to automate and you can go end to end across all your applications, when large enterprises, as it happens, people leave the company, new people join, and regression suites just start growing and growing, not knowing what the previous person did. And this is really because there's no structured way to designing their tests. So we need to have something like that in place. The business themselves, they know the most important ones, as you might know. SMEs, key users from the SAP world as well. You know the most important ones. If there's any type of change coming through, you probably know what are the minimum tests we need to run for the most important tests. But once you try to get above that minimum smoke test, your portfolios just start growing and growing unless you have a structured way to do that. And these numbers we've seen across a large number of our customers when we first approached them. So this is why we have what we call test case design built into ECT. So it's in a combination with our requirements section, which you may have seen in some of the other sessions, but really was focusing more on the red section. If you've seen it or used it before, it's all about test case design, but we will touch on the requirements a little bit from that side. It's really about keeping your test portfolio under control, just increasing it in a linear fashion and not having this explosion of tests because we have to maintain all these tests going forward and execute them. So this test case design really helps customers with this. So we're going to have a look at a few examples today, but the main one we'll focus on is an SAP one. And we like to use order to cash. I think everyone's familiar with that. So this came from our customer as well. This was a real example where we saw they're basically doing order to cash when they went to create a sales order. They had 14 organizations, 15 different materials, 5 customer types, 2 order types. And if they were to try to do all combinations, because again, they know the most important, but if they want that feeling that they've actually covered everything and they can test everything from that side, they get this explosion of tests. If you look at all combinations, when you look at these numbers, that's not something that's really maintainable, 2,100, just based on their environment and the different master data that they had set up. So what we want to do is basically, when you have a look at that, that's just in one transaction alone. If you look at the whole order to cash, if I just play that out very quickly, you'll see each different transaction or each part of the process will just increase and you'll just get this, what we call this explosion of tests, and it's just really not maintainable. So this is where test case design will really come in. And this is something that you'll see that within Tricentis, you're going to see things like all combinations is in there, orthogonal, pairwise, but something that Tricentis has won awards for, our founder Wolfgang Plotz created, is something called linear expansion. And we look at these different permutations in a different way, and we can increase it and for just those particular data variants that we had, we get to 118 across the whole order to cash process from that side. And this is something, as you can see, it's very maintainable from both a manual and an automation perspective. Okay. And as you might have seen in the other sessions, Tosca is not just all about SAP. We're looking at all the processes happening before, all happening after. We're end-to-end automation, and linear expansion in our test case design works the same way. We can use linear expansion across all technologies. It's quite independent of it from that side. So let's jump in. In order to show you that it's not dependent on technologies, let's look at a nice analogy here. When you cut your lawn, if you guys have lawns out there, backyards or front yards, or from that side, when you have to cut your lawn, how do you approach it? Okay. The first thing we want to do is we want to mow the whole lawn. Okay. And we can compare all of this to testing as well. But we don't want to mow the same patch twice. We want to mow it very short, so we don't have to come back and do it again within a week. And we want to find a way to minimize the amount of time needed to mow the lawn. Okay. So we can relate this to the testing world. When we come to testing as well, when we look at mowing the lawn, you want to achieve the highest possible test coverage. We want to avoid any redundant test cases. We want to reduce the maintenance issues, which is something that you've seen with model-based automation. That's all what Tricentis is about with the ECT product and Tosca. And we want to find the minimum set of data combinations, which is really our test case design from that side. And this all comes down to the effectiveness. But lastly, of course, we'll come back to that in a sec. But so let's look at this quick example. If you were to mow the lawn, which way do you think you would be more effective to mow it, horizontally or vertically from that side? But we can look at this in a different way. If you look at the amount of turns you have to do when you mow the lawn with your lawn mower, you can see on the left there, it takes 4 turns from that side, and on the right, there's double the amount. And if, let's say, for example, it took 2 seconds for each turn, and it takes about a second to mow each patch, we can even work up a formula, and you can see if we do it on the left that way, from that side, it would take 53 seconds, as opposed to 61 seconds if we did it on the right, going up and down. So the amount of turns really affected it. So we can apply this sort of this sort of data combinations, having a structured way to doing everything in all areas. And lastly, of course, we don't want to do it manually. We want to use a lawnmower. So we do want to automate it where possible and be more efficient on that side. So that was just a nice analogy to get us started. But we'll jump right in now, and we'll see a live presentation of how Tricentis' test case design works. So in order to do that, I'm just going to bring up my virtual machine here. That's fine. And let's bring up Tricentis Tosca, or ECT, if you're familiar with that term. So you can see on the tabs you've probably seen this before, all the different tabs representing all the different sections within Tosca. We're going to focus more on the yellow and the red today. I'll stick more with the red, and this is what we call the test case design from that side. So when you automate a process, and let's say you've gone through it in one particular path, and then you want to run through different data variants through it, like we saw with the SAP order to cash, with all the different materials and sales organizations and divisions that we have to use. Generally, what you're going to see is most people with other tools use something like Excel spreadsheets to do their data-driven testing. So Tosca does support Excel spreadsheets as well if you decide to do data-driven testing. But what we wanted to show you today is how test case design can do data-driven testing, but also it basically optimizes your tests themselves and removes any redundancies, keeps the number of tests down to a minimum, and has a maximum test coverage. And it allows you a report on that as well. Okay. So if I open up a spreadsheet, just you might be familiar with that. Let's say you're using a Excel spreadsheet today, maybe to go through different data variants, or maybe this is something the business is providing the end users and saying, these are the different sales orders we want to set up from that side. You're going to see things like order type, sales organizations, distribution channel, and going on from that side. So we can set up all this data within Tosca, but the nice thing is now we're going to be able to control it, and we don't have people just coming and adding lines and lines of data. And then at some point, you're going to get redundancies and duplicates and that explosion of tests we talked about. So let's set that up in Tosca and see what that would look like. Okay. So in the red section here, what we can do is we can right click here and create a test sheet. And this will represent kind of like a spreadsheet in Excel. And I'll refer to that because I know everyone's familiar with it. And this test sheet will basically be all the data combinations that we want to run. And let's stick with VA01 for today. So what we can first thing to do is look at what are the different fields that we would interact with VA01. Now, the nice thing about test case design is you'll see I haven't brought up SAP at any point here, and I'm not going to at this point, because test case design is something that you can really use independent of the system being available. I've worked in a lot of projects. We use test case design in 2-week sprints where we only have access to the environment right at the end of the sprint. This is all the work you can do in advance. Because what we've seen is it takes 50 to 75% to find and prepare test data and do all that effort before you can actually start automating. So we want to be productive and do all of this. And if you are working in sprints, for example, you'll see you are able to do test case design without having any system access. You just need the business rules and some knowledge, maybe some access to some SMEs that have that knowledge in their head. And you can create all the data combinations, logical and physical data. We'll talk about that as well. Negatives, positives, boundary testing, all of that is something you can do. And that way, when you have access to the environment at the end of the sprint, you can simply just hook up your data sheets to your automated test, and it'll create all the different combinations of tests, and then you can hit the run button and away you go. Okay. So we're going to start off by creating for VA01, what are the different fields we would interact with? And I've got a little Excel spreadsheet on my right here that you can't see, just to so I don't blank out on any of them. But I'm going to go through, and as you'll see with VA01, the first thing you'll probably enter is your order type. So let's just go ahead and create what we call an attribute for order type over here. Okay. And then within the order type, you can create all your different data variants. Now, inside Tosca, we call them attributes and instances, but they'll basically represent different business rules, depending how you set this up, or they'll represent different input fields that link back to business rules in your application. And then we have something called instances. So I'll click on that here, and you'll see it's created an empty instance. Now, for my system in our example, I'm going to stick with OR, which would be a standard order. And you can create all the different order types that you want to based on your master data that you're going to have set up in your environments. So I'm going to right click over here and create another one. And let's say we want one for rush order. And one more over here. I think that was a delivery order from that side. And these are just the ones we have set up in our environment. So I'm sticking with the ones I'm familiar to. And I'll come over here now and hit create a new attribute. So we can go through and create all the different fields that you would interact with for the business rules. If there's anything that's not business relevant, you can always leave that out and add that later as well, which you'll see as well. So I'll go through and just create a few. Sales org, I'll use some abbreviations because I'm very slow at typing. Oops. Undo that and create a few instances here. And let's say we have sales organization 1000. I'll make up a few here. 2000, 3000, and one more. And X300. This is something we have in our system on our side. So I'll do a couple more just so you can see. At the moment, what I'm doing is I'm just mapping out what are the inputs that I'm going to enter in my system that will relate to a business rule that will affect the result of the actual order in some way from that side. We can do this on a both logical and a physical way. So if you didn't know what the actual order types were, like OR, let's say, for example, you didn't know that standard order, you're going to use OR for it. So maybe you have a few different ones. You could just put the word standard order in there, and we can still use that to create the data combinations, and we can assign a physical value to it as a second step. For today, I'm keeping it simple, and I'm just going to use the physical values from that side. And let's just jump over here. I'll do a couple more, and then we'll get going, and we can see it in how it works. Distribution channel. And last one, I'm going to use division here. And I'm going to cheat for a second. I'm just going to copy some values. So you can copy from clipboard, from Excel spreadsheets, from text files, from WordPad, whatever it might be, and you can actually just paste the values in here. So if you have all this information, like you saw, I had it in an Excel spreadsheet, you can also just grab it and dump it in there to save you typing and just speed things up as well. So let's grab a few more divisions. I think we only have a couple here, so I'll just manually do these. 00, and one more. 1. Okay, so now we have all our instances. The left and the right has the same view, as you can see. I'll just expand them so you can see it's the same thing. So we've got all of these here. Now, you might be familiar with things like orthogonal or pairwise, and of course, all combinations. So these are all built into test case design so that you can use them. They all have their own place. We're not saying we use Tricentis linear expansion for everything. You can selectively use ones. It really depends on the process. Again, your SMEs have a lot of knowledge, and you might know your one area is very prone to defects, and you might want to test all combinations between a few different fields. You can selectively use that, but we can build up this overall test sheet because it will represent your whole process from beginning to end, going one screen at a time and building in all that logic using different techniques, which we'll see over there. Okay, so just so you can see, just based on these few values I entered, if I try to do all combinations and hover over here, it's created the whole data sheet for me. It's created 96 instances from that side. So that's that explosion of tests we're talking about. And when you look at all combinations, there's no logic from one from one field to another, like order type to sales org. If it wasn't set up that way, you wouldn't see any of that. It's just basically saying use every combination and create me a data set based on that. So I'm going to delete that, but just so you can see it's in there. So if you wanted to selectively use all combinations between two fields, that is possible. Let's try orthogonal. You might be aware of that one. You might have seen it in some other areas, but basically orthogonal says just show me each value represented at least once in your data set. So you can see here it's done that. It's really reduced it. I don't even have to hover over it. I can see there's only 4 actual test cases. Our test cases go in columns and not rows, by the way, just so you can see here. And you can see it's created 4 tests. And again, it's just mixed everything up there. So there's nothing dependency from one to another. And even if there wasn't any dependencies, if you ran these and one of them failed, you wouldn't know which value caused the actual failure. So you would have a lot of error analysis and digging around to do from that side. So what we wanted to show you today is Tricentis' linear expansion. So you can see here there's pairwise. Pairwise also makes sure that each pair is represented at least once in the set, but we're going to focus on linear expansion over here. So the way linear expansion works, if I click it over here, you're going to see it's going to say cannot be performed. What it expects from you and your end users, like I mentioned, you have that knowledge and it's very valuable for us. You put that into Tosca here, and it's basically saying design a straight through or a happy path. What's the most common thing that you run through? Again, after there's any type of change, just based on your knowledge and the history, what's the test you would want to run if there was a change? So we'd come over here and we would just select the instance, the value, and we would change the character to a straight through or a red, which is a happy path over there. And we go through each set and we do that from that side. So if I come over here, just change that to red, red, and 2 toggles red. And some of you might have seen already, when I toggled once, there was a little X. So all linear expansion requires is the actual red over here. But what you can see here is you can also do things and put in negative tests. So maybe you had, you wanted to go through and test that for this set of data, for the sales org, for the division, for the distribution channel, a certain order type doesn't work. We can always go in there and let me just put ZZ as an example. Maybe that's not set up, or maybe it's been removed. So you want to add a test to ensure that that order type doesn't work. You can toggle it and you can represent it as a negative test over there with a little X on it. And all these little characters do add value later as well, besides the visual that we can see over here. So I'll just do a couple so we can see here. So I know if I hit 9999, that sales organization doesn't exist. So maybe I'm expecting to see an error. So you can put in all your positives, but also your negatives in here from that side. And now when I select test sheet, I come over here and I select linear expansion. What you'll see here is it's created a data set for me. And if I hover over this, you'll see there's 12 instances, which is very maintainable from that side. But the great thing you'll see now is if I just collapse these to give us a slightly better view, what you'll see it did was the first test it creates is the ones we've marked red. So that's your knowledge, you know what's the happy path or the most important thing. This will most likely go in your smoke tests that will be run and triggered, run these tests every time a new build is deployed and give that feedback that everything's okay. And what linear expansion does is with that assumption that you've run that smoke test and everything's okay, and now you want to focus on your regression testing or to test the changes as well, it's basically just going to divert from one value from that happy path or straight through that we're calling it here. So you can see the next test is focusing basically on rush order, and then it's just pairing it up with the reds from the first one. So if this ever failed, we would know straight away rush order is the issue because we know from our smoke tests, we had no issues with the other values from that side. And it does that the whole way through, all for order type. And then once it's tested all of them, it'll swap that out for red, jump down to the next attribute or business rule, and then start testing those individually. And you can see at the top, that's the focus of each of these tests. So that really helps us not just by minimizing the tests, they're growing in a linear way every time we add new tests, but also now when something fails, we don't have a lot of error analysis to do because we can pinpoint what actually went wrong. And we know the value straight away that we can tie it to. So let's scroll across here and you can see it's done that all the way to the end till the last division 01 from that side. Okay. And also the nice thing now is what if one of your negative tests over here stopped you from actually proceeding? We don't want to this will mark it like that, and we know that's the focus of that test. So there's no assumptions that these values weren't tested for some reason because the negative test blocked you up there. So it resolves a lot of issues by doing it this way. And now, like we mentioned, the great thing is if you decide to add more tests as time goes on, that's not an issue. You can come over here. Let's say I added a new division, and let's say 02. Okay. You can see it's bold over there. So the nice thing about this is not all of us, you're going to have different teams. People will still leave and join the teams and things like that. So maybe you've joined and you don't know, like, if someone else has actually tested this value. What it'll do is, first of all, it'll mark it in bold. And based on this test sheet, it'll actually identify whether someone else has used this value in this spreadsheet. So it'll mark it in bold, but even better yet, we can bring in a nice column. There's a lot of columns. For today, you'll see here, it's a usage column. Instance usage there. And you'll see it'll actually tell you the instances that have been used. So this is looking at on a test sheet level. It's only one level over here at the moment, as you can see, but we can break it down with different parents, as I'll show you in a little while. But as people start adding values or removing it, you can actually see whether those values that someone maybe else added and then forgot to create a test for it or forgot to generate a new instance. It'll basically give you that visual of whether that value is being used and tested in your system. So it's identifying this gap in a way. If someone had just added it there, but there's no test actually covering it. But now the nice thing you can do here is you can come up here, you can do a right click, you can say complete instances, and it will just simply add a new test and change it to 100%. And we should have just a new test right at the end that's filled that in. So what test case design is doing, we're looking at a very basic one here and just a small part of this whole order to cash process, as you can see, but this is very useful when you do this the whole way through, and it's going to keep your whole regression suites under control by having this structured approach. Because what you'll see is little things that will help you, like if someone came along and did add a duplicate test or something like that, you could actually come in here and say merge duplicate instances together, because these data sheets will start growing and you'll have a lot of dependencies built into it, which we'll also have a look at next. So this will allow anyone to basically come in here and have a look and make sure that there's no redundancies in these data sets. Because in most cases, although we can test these manually, these will be automated. So we don't want to be maintaining automation when it's not adding any value. So let's do one more. And I'm going to add one more just for a visual so you can see. You can also add things like error messages in here if you have any verifications, whether they're positive or negative verifications. And you can, again, just update, toggle the business relevance. So you can change it into a verification. And you could even add any error messages that you're expecting to pop up. And I'm just going to be very generic here and say verify error in SAP status bar, just as an example there. And then you could go basically assign this to maybe this one over here, the 99 that breaks and causes an error. So this is basically all the work you can do without having access to the environment, creating all your data combinations, being sure that you've got that risk coverage based on your business rules, even adding the physical data, the error messages, all of that can be done. So when you've got access to the environment, you can simply automate it using our model-based approach, drag and drop it, and data drive your templates from that side, and everything's already done. All the logic is in there and all the error messages as well. Now, one thing, it might have come through on the chat, I haven't looked yet, but people will always ask, what about dependencies? You update something in one field and it changes the drop-down list somewhere else, or like a drop-down list, you choose a value and it updates another one, like you select a country, maybe Australia, and based on the country, it populates a city drop-down list with all the cities for Australia. And if you choose New Zealand or India or America, that's all relative to what will update it. That can also be mapped in here, but obviously, as you can see, Tosca doesn't know about that. The test case design section is basically just using linear expansion, creating single tests, but it doesn't know anything about dependencies from one field to another. So the way we would take care of that is there's two ways. One is you could basically double click on, you could build basically that logic in yourself. So I'm going to just, let's just jump into sales organization here. I could come into here and say, add, for example, an error message again, just within this level, a new instance. And I'm just going to say error 1 as an example. So if I double click on this, I've got it here just in focus on the left. You could basically manually build that logic in. So here I could basically say if someone selects 999, it's automatically going to update to error 1 over here from that side. So you'll see if I jump back to the test sheet, that's already added in there. So if I choose 99 over here, just as an example, it automatically updated to error 1 over there. So you can manually add dependencies from one to another. And let's say it was countries to cities, you could build that logic into it. You would just basically just select it like I did over here and build that business logic into on that level. So when something gets changed here, it affects that one there. And then at runtime, you know, those are the values it'll choose based on from country to city in that example. But there's another way to do that as well, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to show you that. So for that, I'm going to create a new test sheet just very quickly. And I'm going to copy them because you've seen my typing. And let's jump over here. Create a new instance. Oops, sorry, a new attribute. Call sales organization. And I'm just copying all the values from an Excel spreadsheet on the right here just to speed up time. And there you can see my values there. And I'm going to do one more. In this one, we're going to use currency. So in this example, similar to the countries and the cities, but I'm trying to stick with SAP's use cases for today. So what you'll see here is I've created just an attribute called sales organization with currency, with all the different currencies that could potentially relate to it. So now if I click over here on the test sheet, and let me just expand it on the left. If I try to do, let's first mark the two as straight throughs. If I use linear expansion, what you'll see is, let's drop the usage one. Tosca doesn't know about business rules. So it'll start off and maybe it'll get it right and say Austria is going to use the euro, Netherlands is going to use the euro, and then straight away it's broken and it said America is using the euro. So it doesn't know about that business logic. So you can build it in the way I jumped to that level, and you can build it in on that side. But we also have what we call relations tab from that side that we can use. Let's just close this down. So if I'm going to click over here, we have this relations tab. So you can, it's just a different view, but basically you can come in here and say, I'm going to add a new relation. And you can see on the right-hand side, you can give it a name and maybe say, what is this? Sales orgs, sales org to currency. For example, you can put in a whole description about what it is, and then you can say basically what type of a relation is it? Is it a required, forbidden, and constrained? Okay, so I'm going to say constrained just for this example. There's a few there, but I just wanted to show you how we can build that in. And I can come over here and say, I'm going to create a business rule that says, if someone chooses Austria, Netherlands, and Germany, they should automatically get the euro. They should only get the option of the euro. So when Tosca generates these data combinations now, it's going to take that into account from that side. Okay, so I can do the same. I can create another one that says for America. Scroll down. Let me just reset the view over here. Oops. Okay, and come down here to America and do one more for the UK. Oops. Cancel, and there we go. So hopefully if I've got that right, they've mapped to each other. So my vision with the lineup is a little hard there, but we can jump back here now and I can delete the instances we created before. And then we wouldn't use this one here. We would basically right click and we would see the option for generate instances. And there's one that says relations, which means we've built in that logic into Tosca's TCD here. And now when it goes and it generates, you can see Austria, Germany, Netherlands has the euro, and America has USA, and Britain has UK from that side. Okay. So there's a number of ways to do this, and you would do these on different levels. You would start maybe even 2 fields at a time. You can build up to a screen, and then you can go on the whole process. We won't have this flat structure like I have over here. You would have more of a parent-child hierarchy for the different rules on the different levels that you want, and it'll build those dependencies into it. And the nice thing about that is once you've built in these rules, you can take that, and only one person has to do it, and you can build basically a class out of it, and it can be reused. So hopefully that the word class doesn't scare you. It's very simple. It's just dragging the test sheet onto a test folder on the side. Oops, let me just create a new folder. Put it up here. Oops, no, did that wrong. Oh, my mistake. You need a parent. So that was what I mentioned. Just forgot that one step. So in order to build a class, so let's say you built in that logic over here, you would just basically put it into a parent over there, and then you can drag and drop that into a folder, and you can create class over there. So hopefully that's not too scary, and that's just got our relations in it. Let's just close that down. It's just giving you that notification, but basically we're saying you've built in that logic, whether you do it manually or whether you use the relations, and you can build a class out of it. And this could be just like a business rule based on the sales org and the currency as an example there. And now this can be reused elsewhere. So if you have that same logic elsewhere in your system, you've built a little class, you have a single point of maintenance for that, for those business rules, and you can just drag and drop them onto other test sheets. So I can always create a new test sheet here, as you can see, and just simply drag and drop the class onto there. And you can see it's just referencing the class. This is where your maintenance gets done. Remember, Tricentis and Tosca and ECT is all about maintenance from that side, reducing the maintenance going forward. So it's give us a single point of maintenance. And this will just, if you make changes here, it'll roll out to all your test sheets where they're reusing that from that side. Okay. So I'll close that down here. And I need to speed up a little bit because I know we're going to run out. We want to save some questions. But what you'll see is I've built up a number of classes here, and they can be a number of different things. So it could be, if I jump over here, let's say different users you're going to use to log into SAP, for example. There's just my user 3 times, but basically I might be using it in different ways. You can swap out the client, for example. That might be considered a class, or different URLs, different data variants that you're using to log into an application or log out or whatever it might be. There's a lot of different uses for it. What I've created over here is, as you can see, just based on our example, I've created a few classes for standard order, rush order, delivery, all my sales orders as well. So I've got 4 different classes. And what that means is if someone else came to create a test and maybe they wanted to create their own test sheet, and let's just say order to cash, for example, they can just reuse all that logic that I've created before, drag it onto my test sheets over here, and built into here, all of these classes have the dependencies from sales organizations to distribution channels, as you can see over here, to divisions, all the validations that might pop up as well if they use incorrect. So I've got things like some negative tests in here as well. If someone uses 12 or 19, they're going to expect different error messages in the status bar. All that's built in there on different levels. And then when you come to the parent level here, you can simply say generate linear expansion, and it's generated all my tests for me using that logic that I've created in my classes over there. So it's all just about reuse as well from that side and having that single point of maintenance. Same as the automation side, we're going to do the same over here in the test case design section. Okay. Let's just check here. I know I've got too much time, but there's a couple things I just want to make sure we show. We mentioned risk coverage. It's all about the risk coverage. So if I come up over here, we have another column to bring in. You might have seen this in test case requirements section. There's a field called weight from that side. If I jump over here just to refresh anyone who hasn't seen the requirements, we report on provide this additional report that reports on the business risk being covered after each execution, not just pure numbers of tests that pass and fail, because we believe this is a more valuable report that ties directly to your business risk. So all your tests will run in the execution section, but we tie them back to a business requirement, and we use your knowledge to weight the requirements according to the frequency, how often the process is used, and to the potential damage should that process break. And Tosca will come up with the weight for you over there. And if I just create one very quickly so you can see how that works, and let's just say we're doing our SAP 24 demo. you could say maybe this is going to be used frequency of 3, and the class would be, say, 4 as an example. And you see it comes up with the weight. So it's an exponential weight. So it's frequency to the power of 2, damage to the power of 2, and it comes up with the weight. So we need your business users to give us this knowledge. But what it will do is, as you start linking tests to this, it gives you a more meaningful report saying, based on the tests that failed, linked to the requirements, this is how it's affecting the system, because not all processes are the same and not all tests are the same. So we've already weighted the processes here, but we should also weight the tests. And we can do that even without having the tests, like we mentioned. So here's as a weight. You could manually go through here and weight different areas. If I open this up here, you'll see there's a 1 on each of these. So you could say, for example, the straight through should be twice as more important, or maybe even 10 times more important than any of the other tests, because that's my smoke test. If that fails, I want that reflected in the report. And this knowledge, and this can basically be linked back to the actual requirements, which I'll show in a second. But before I link that up, what you'll see here is based on the different values that you've marked as straight throughs, as negatives, we can mark them as boundary tests as well. If you don't want to manually weight it, you can actually go to Tosca and say, tell Tosca to auto assign weights. So if I click on that, it's going to auto assign some weights over here. And if I open that up, you can see it said basically using the importance of the tests, whether they're straight throughs, whether they're negatives, or however you set them up, it's going to automatically assign weights for each test and using those. And it did it on a low level, so you can get very granular, but it all ties up to the overall test. And then you can basically drag and drop that test sheet onto your requirement over here. Do a right click. We just need to do an update weights for test links. And all that gets pulled through. So basically what it's saying is, for this requirement or this process, each of the tests I've created, they're individually weighted. My straight through is going to be the most important. So if that fails, it will also reflect in that graph. It's not doing that at the moment because I need an actual test linked to an execution list before it will start populating the rest of it. But you can see the weights have all been updated there. Okay. And last thing to tie it all together, we've seen how our data, you've got all your data over here. Now, let's say you do have access to the environment. You can automate your test. You would have seen this in some of the other sessions. This is basically a test case, but now instead of data being in the test, it's all parameterized, driven from the test case design section. And it's all, you can see there's the Excel. So all that data is being fed in from the red section from that side. And it'll go through and you can parameterize your error messages that pop up when you error messages are displayed from that side. And of course, you can pull out your sales order when they're created. And the nice thing about this is using the test case design to drive it. You can put in conditions as well. So for example, when we come down here, we'll come down a straight path, but if someone puts in an incorrect sales org, it's going to pop up an error message. So that particular test that's generated wouldn't go past there. So when you instantiate these tests and generate the physical tests that will run in your execution lists, this particular one will stop over there. You can do a cleanup and then carry on from that side. So it automatically creates this view for you, this control flow diagram, which is nice and handy when you have a lot of business logic driving your template themselves. So now that we've completed our test case design, we have it linked to our template and we can generate the actual tests that we'll need to run. So I'll select my sandbox folder here, check this out. And I can select my template again and we will instantiate. And this will merge my data-driven section with my template and create the actual tests that we will run in execution lists. So if I select my folder here, what we're going to see is all the actual tests that relate to my data sheet. And I can go through and just have a look at a couple, and you'll see the first one will have the data for our standard order. The second one will change based on the data for rush order and so forth. So what we do now, you can see over here, we have about 40 plus different tests with all our positives, our negatives. And these are the tests that we'll actually run. We have a single point on maintenance, which is our test case design section. Our template has our business logic and our flow, and our modules contains the actual automation. So now we drag and drop our template folder into our green section here, which is the execution lists. I have an execution list created already. Drop it in there. There's all my existing tests with passes and fails, and here's my template with the tests I've just created. And we have 42 over here. I'll pick my first one and just run it, and we'll see that go through. And this really ties it all together, showing you the data-driven section, which is our test case design, and how we really need to think about this up front. Even if the system is not available, we can design all our data-driven tests, ensure that we have our business risk all covered, and then when the environments are available, we can link it up to our actual automation, and then we can run them. And so my test case has run, and you can see there's my 1 out of 42 that has been executed, and this one went through and passed successfully. So thanks for watching the session on test case design.